What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Organized Chaos, where we are always chaotic. If you are a woman in tech and you are trying to figure out your life and your career and your hobbies and your friends and how all that fits together into the nice, neat little puzzle, have no fear. I'm doing the same exact thing along with you, and I'm sure a ton of other women are in the same boat. Today, I wanted to answer a question that I actually get quite often, which is how, as an American, I only hold an American passport, do I get to live abroad? Right? Like, how is it possible that I get to have this one passport, just the American passport, but I've lived in 6 different countries over the last 10 years? I mean, it's pretty incredible for me to even think about. I'm so freaking grateful for the experiences that I've had. It hasn't always been easy. Like, it's been a difficult journey, and I wanted to share some of those tips and those tricks that I've picked up along the way in order to hopefully help you either make the decision to go and take the plunge, so to speak, or start that research journey, go and get the visa, go and, live out these dreams and these experiences that you've always wanted to have, because literally we only live once, right? Like, YOLO to the fullest extent. You need to go and do exactly what's going to make you happy. And for me, that decision was made when I was 18. I knew that I wanted to go and I wanted to live abroad. I wanted to collect these experiences instead of things. Has that changed the trajectory of my life? Absolutely, right? Like, I haven't been able to do some things because I decided to go and live abroad. But was it worth it? 110%. It was absolutely worth it. Well, yes, it hasn't always been easy. You have to deal with visas and homesickness and culture shock and culture unshock, which I will explain later on in this episode. You're also meeting this new group of friends, right? You're also expanding your horizons. You're learning new languages. You're understanding how different cultures work. And all of that for me has been so incredibly invaluable. And when I was 18, I decided I had grown up I come from cowboys and cowgirls and on the West Coast in Arizona in the US. That's where my family is located. But I grew up in San Francisco. So I'm really split across cowboys and cowgirls and hippies in California. And so I come from this really awesome mix. But in San Francisco, I started to get the international experience, quote unquote, because I think anyone who's lived internationally before knows that it's not totally true in San Francisco, but it's much more of a melting pot than, say, Arizona was. But when I got that experience, I said to myself, all right, when I turn 18, when I go and have the opportunity to go to university, I want to go somewhere that's going to continue to expand those horizons. That's going to continue to allow me to meet people from different backgrounds and cultures who speak different languages and have different accents, because I knew my reality was not the only one that existed. And that was the decision I made. I said, right, I'm going to go. And I decided to go to university in Switzerland, in this tiny town called Lausanne. I went to a hospitality school there. It was a 4-year program, but really it was only 3 years at school because we did 2 separate 6-month full-time internships. So the first one, I went back to Beverly Hills. And then the second one, I actually went and did in Sevilla in the south of Spain. Spoiler alert, if you can consider it a spoiler alert, I actually ended up doing my second internship. I was the assistant general manager at a little hotel called the Hacienda de San Rafael. So gorgeous. I loved the people and the family there so much that Philip and I actually decided to go and get married there. So we had our full ceremony. We had a full weekend there. We rented out the property, and I got to go back and live that dream that I had created in my mind 9 years ago. So I think that story in and of itself shows and proves that, yes, it was all worth it. And then when I graduated from university, I went back to San Francisco. That wasn't my first and initial choice. It was difficult for me, I will be honest, to find a visa to stay abroad in Europe, which was ultimately what I wanted. But of course, life works out in the way that it needs to work out. And so I ended up moving to London a couple of years later, where I stayed for about 3 years. That's where I met Philip. And then we decided we wanted to go and travel for a year abroad in Europe. So we popped around. We went to France and Spain and Switzerland and Italy. And I'm probably forgetting a country, but we really decided, hey, we don't know where we want to go and live next. So we're going to go and experience as much as we can. And it was the time in our life for us to be able to do that. But you may not know that as an American living abroad, you can actually only stay in what's called the Schengen region. That's the region of the most countries within the EU, not a complete list, but more or less for these purposes. You can only stay for up to 90 days within a 6-month period. So that's actually relatively small. So that required a very specific visa on its own. Then now moving here to Amsterdam, I'm on another visa. So you just I picked all these visas up. You should see my passport. I picked all these visas up as I've gone along. And with each step, with each journey, with each visa process, with each country I've dealt with, I've learned something new. So I thought whether or not you want to go and live abroad, or if you just want to go and work and travel, there's so many different options available for you. I thought I would sit down and walk you through some of those options. Okay, so the main question I get now that I've set the scene is, how did I do it? Right? Like, you know how I made the decision to go and do it, but what are the actual fundamental steps that I took? Now, quick disclaimer here, I can only say that these are my own lived experiences. These are the visas that I went and got. These are the visas that I was accepted for. I can't guarantee anything, but hopefully I can set you on the right path and give you options for your own individual journey. Step one for me was be delusional. Rarely take no for an answer. Now, obviously stay within the confines and the limits of the law. I don't even need to add that as a disclaimer, but I was not going to take no for an answer. I remember when I was 18 and I went and I told my parents that I wanted to go to university in Switzerland, and I think their jaws must have dropped to the floor. They were just like, what, how, what, like, is this even a possibility? Because no one had ever, in my family at least, thought of it. No one had ever gone to university abroad, and this was a brand new concept. Even within my high school class, this was a brand new concept. And so I went and I studied and I tried to figure out what would make it work for me to go to university abroad. Well, it turns out there's just a student visa that you need to go and get. Obviously, there are requirements within that. We had to go and visit an embassy, which was the first time I'd ever gone to an embassy before. And the Swiss embassy was the cleanest of all embassies I'd ever gone to. Luckily, it was already in San Francisco. But it was a relatively easy process, all things said and done. And to be fair, all of these were relatively easy. The biggest hurdle for me was actually not how do I get the visa, but do I want to go and live and work in this place? And like I said, I was quite delusional. I actually didn't think, I probably should have thought about this a little bit more. I didn't think enough about what it would take, but had I thought any more about it, I may have even stopped myself. So I just allowed myself to continue to be delulu and allowed myself to make this decision. I hadn't visited the campus before I attended university. I hadn't really looked into the class schedule. I really didn't know a huge amount, but I decided this is what I want to go and do. And I am so, so grateful that I did, because I went and met people from all over the world. I had this incredible experience. I was able to go and graduate with this degree that I love. Well, I no longer use it. It's given me so much experience that is invaluable. And there's no way that I would have changed the decisions that I made. Remember, and I think I say this quite often, everything is fake and nothing is real, right? Like, obviously, we have to stay lawful in our actions, moral in our actions, ethical in our actions. But if you want to go and work and live abroad, go and do it, right? Like Philip and I do not come from the same background, meaning we don't have the same passports. But did we get married? Yes, absolutely. There's always a way to kind of go through it and get through it. You just have to decide if that's the paperwork that you want to move through or not. And obviously it takes time, it takes money sometimes, but that exists. You can find it, you can go and get it. And it's not always as hard as I think your brain may make it out to be. Okay, but let's say that you're not looking to go and live abroad and you just want to go for a shorter stint abroad. Well, that's possible too, right? Like, I know so many people from different tech companies, especially, that work 100% remote. I have friends who have come and they visited me and they've worked out of my home in their same exact schedule, just the hours are slightly flipped, slightly, I say. And their bosses are fine with it because they're continuing to get their work done. Now, when I was a manager, absolutely, that is the approach that I would have taken. Not every manager is going to take this, but it's worth the conversation. It's definitely worth the conversation, because as long as you're getting your work done, I never cared where you worked. And many managers take a very similar approach. So go and have that chat. Be delusional. Be like, hey, whether you are single or in a relationship or whatever your own situation, say, hey, this is what I want to go and do. I want to go and travel to Spain or Portugal or Italy or France or the Netherlands. Like, it doesn't matter what country you want to go to. Just have the chat and you can make it work. Which leads me to step 2. You have to decide the timeline that you're going to stay there. Because if you're just like, hey, I want to go and travel, right? Like, my brother came and visited us when we were staying in France and we were skiing there, and he works 100% remotely. His team is from all over the world. He just came for a week. He worked for a couple of days from his laptop, and bada bing, bada boom. It was super easy. It required one conversation with his manager. That's one situation. Didn't require a visa, nothing. It just required some booked flights. I picked him up at the airport. It was easy. On the other hand, if you're trying to stay for longer, this is where it gets slightly more complicated because you may actually need a visa. I mentioned that if you're an American, I can't speak for other countries, but in the US, if with a US passport, you're only allowed to stay in the Schengen region for up to 90 days in a 6-month period. In the UK, you can stay for 6 months at a time. Anything beyond that, you're going to have overstayed your visa because technically your passport just counts as a visa in and of itself. Okay, so what are your visa options? Well, there are actually a ton of them. You can have your work sponsor your visa if you want to come and live abroad outside of your country of origin. That's what I did in London. I had my work sponsor my visa. I was very, very lucky for it though, because that is, I would say, less common, especially now, but definitely an option. You can go and study. A lot of times the student visas will give you a certain amount of time after your studies are over in order to switch it over, and they make it easier. They create paths for you to switch it over to a longer term visa that's going to allow you to stay in that country that you studied in. Great. You can go and get sponsored by a spouse or a partner in certain countries. Obviously, that's not as easy for everybody, but it's still an option. Or, and this is one of my favorite ones that I found so interesting when I went and started to travel and do my own research, especially after we decided we were going to go and leave the UK. Philip and I looked at each other and we were like, okay, Regan's going to need a visa. Philip's very lucky in that he's German. We weren't married at the time. And so we said, okay, how do we make this possible? I was going to go out on my own. And so work wasn't necessarily the question, right? I didn't need to go and talk to a manager about it because my manager was myself. I was starting my own business. But what we did need to be concerned about was overstaying my Schengen visa. That 3-month visa in a 6-month period was going to make it complicated considering we wanted to live and work for a year. Well, enter the French long-term tourist visa. That gave us so many options. It takes about 3 months to get approved, but once it is approved, it gives you access to go and live, not work, because you're still going to need to earn out of your country of origin or your home country, but live in France for 12 months. And then that gives you access to all of Schengen. So that's why we were able to go to Italy and Spain and France. And France, obviously, I was there beyond that visa, but you know what I mean. We were able to go and visit all of these other countries. And so this is possible. A ton of different countries have these schemes where they're encouraging people to go and work remote. They're encouraging people to come abroad because they know that people want to go and they want to be digital nomads. So they're creating these pathways for you. I've heard of the same thing in Spain and in Portugal, and even the Netherlands has a great scheme, which is called the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty. Again, nobody talks about this. This is not talked about widely enough. The Dutch-American Friendship Treaty allows you, if you are American, to come and freelance here. And what's super cool about this visa is you don't even need to apply from your home country. You can actually come to the Netherlands on your 90-day visa, that like visa that you get just with your passport, and apply directly within the country. Now, you need to put money up for collateral. You need to set up a business. Like this has to be a commitment of yours, but it's a total option. And so many more Americans are on this visa than you would actually think. And it gives you a handful of years here. It gives you access to renting an apartment, to bank accounts, to the whole thing. And so there are options. Like I say, be delusional about it. Think to yourself, is this something that I want? If it's a short-term situation, go for something like the digital nomad visas that a ton of different countries are creating. If it's a longer-term option, well, maybe the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty, if you want to come and live in Amsterdam, or you could get your work to sponsor the visa, or you could, I guess, fall in love. But the options are endless for you as long as you're willing to do a little bit of digging. Now, that leads me to step 3. Once you've done the digging, you've secured the visa, make sure you're ready for this step because you need to prepare for what I call the culture shock and the culture unshock. Remember that each country outside of the US in particular, you know, as the US does too, has their own nuances. They have their own culture. They have their own language and way of speaking. And if you're not used to that, well, you might be in for a rude awakening. I remember when I first moved to Switzerland, I had zero expectations. I really did not do the research that I needed to do. I was 18. I was just like flying by the seat of my pants, ready to rock and roll, do whatever was needed of me. And like, honestly, probably helped me in the long run, but I definitely did not make make that mistake again when I move to other countries in the future. I scoped it out. I made sure I understood the culture. I made sure I understood the nuances before I actually moved there, or at the very least, I at least prepared myself to be hit with that culture shock. And it gets less and less as you continue to live and work and, become friends with people from that culture. But I think it's really easy when you move somewhere brand new to be like, oh my God, I'm drowning in the change. Change is really hard for our brain. And if you're already changing your place of work, if you're changing your home, well, then to change the languages that you hear around you or the tone of voice that people talk to you in, all of that just kind of accumulates. And so being prepared for it means that you're going to be able to digest it so much easier and then stay. I would say it's about the 6-month mark when I see most expats have the biggest issue. That's when the homesickness sets in. That's when they go, is this the right decision? Did I make the right decision? When I lived in Switzerland for 6 months, in the first 6 months of university, I thought I was going to leave. Like I honest to God, thought that I was going to take off. I thought I was going to go and change schools. And I was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore because it was so different. You go to the grocery store, you look at the back of a, packet of whatever. I have celiacs, I can't eat gluten. And I go, what are these words on here? And you push back against it because it's change. It's kind of like, I'm sure a ton of people have the experience. They go and they travel somewhere and then they come home and they're like, oh, everything is normal again. I have my stores, I have my place. Everything is where it's supposed to be. But when you move to a new country, you haven't had a chance to set those norms yet for yourself. It takes about 2 years for you to live and breathe in a country and feel like you've acclimated to the point where you can call it your home. But that doesn't mean that the 2 years prior were shit, right? Like it's still an awesome experience every single step of the way. You just need to be aware of that culture shock. One of the bigger parts of culture shock that I just don't think a lot of people talk about or enough people talk about is that when you leave the country that you call home and you go to another country, you're going to get made fun of. Like point blank, end of story, you are going to get made fun of because it's different. When I moved to Switzerland, all of a sudden, all the Swiss people started to make fun of me. When on the flip side, I looked at them like, wait a second, you do things so much differently than I do. But that didn't matter because they were the majority. All of a sudden, instead of being the big fish in the small pond, I was that super small fish in a very big pond. Then I pushed against it and I was like, the words I use aren't weird. My accent's not weird, blah, blah, blah. And this is the culture unshock that I'm talking about. When I went back home, I all of a sudden realized exactly what they were talking about. All of a sudden, I realized that all of the conversations, the things I had been made fun of for my accent, all of that, I was like, oh, I get it. Not because I actually agreed with it, but because it was so different on the flip side. When you've spent a significant amount of time abroad or outside of your home country, coming back into it, you realize, oh, the things that people have pointed out actually start to make sense. And the culture unshock is that feeling that when you left your home country, you felt like you were part of this in-group. We all want to be a part of the in-group. I talk about this all the time. We all want to be a part of this cozy, soft place to land, right? And feel like we're all kind of the same person because it feels safe. Well, when you move abroad, when you leave, it's no longer that safe, warm, cozy feeling until you remake it. And then you turn around and you come home and all of a sudden you feel like, wait a second, nothing has changed here. I have changed so much, but nothing has actually changed. And that feeling can be slightly unsettling. I remember when I first came back after living in, I forget what country it was in, but I was there for the longest period of time that I had been, and I hadn't come home in a couple of years. All of a sudden, I could hear and understand everything. When I landed back in the US, I landed in New York and I could just hear and understand everything and my brain was on overload. And then I went, oh, I get it. I get what people are talking about now. The meal sizes are bigger. You feel like you have this brand new open horizon that not everybody shares, and that's okay. That's okay because they haven't had those same experiences, but this is what I'm talking about with that culture unshock. It's coming back and feeling like, wait a second, do I want to make my home this place that I called home for so many years? Or do I want to continue and turn around and go back out and have these new experiences? It's a decision that you're going to have to make, but it's one that's important to recognize that culture unshock is just as important to understand and realize as the culture shock is. All of this is to say, do I recommend that you take the leap? Absolutely. I recommend that you take the leap. Go and do it. Everything is fake and nothing is real. If you want to go and work and live abroad, you absolutely can. Will it take work? Yes. Is it hard? Sometimes. But is it worth it? 110%. Go and grab the dream. Do what you want to do. Be the person that you want to be. be you're only young once, right? Even if you're older, you can go and do the same exact thing. But if you work in tech, especially because of these 100% remote policies or part-time remote policies, have a conversation with your manager. Just have the chat. Ask them if they'd be up for it. Ask them what you need to do, how you can best prepare, what they need to see in order to feel comfortable with this change. But you can go and spend a couple weeks abroad working. You can go and spend an elongated period of time. And if you do, you're actually going to understand how the culture works. If you're only in a country for a week, well, you're going to go spend time around people that you know. You're going to go spend time in the tourist areas and only see the tourists. You're not going to go into the back streets or the small restaurants, or you're going to try and live as authentically as possible, but it's just not as possible in the 1 week as it is in the month-long stay, let's say, that you could potentially have. All this depends on life circumstance, but I am standing on the other side of that after almost 10 years abroad, saying I would make no other choice if I could go back. Please let me know if you are thinking about moving abroad, if you're thinking about traveling, if you have questions. Thank you so much for being here and tuning in. And as always, I will see you next Thursday. Bye.